Now we're going to look at another application of percent, and that is using simple and compound interest, which is on credit cards or savings accounts. So when interest is paid on interest, we call it compound interest. And then principal times rate times time is what we call simple interest. And the APR is the yearly interest rate associated with the credit card that stands for annual percentage rate. So let's look at this problem. We have Kayla's Collectibles borrows $14,200 at 6% for 60 days. Find the amount of interest due and the total amount to be paid after 60 days. The problem is telling us that we are going to calculate simple interest. So to calculate simple interest, that is simply PRT equals I, or simple interest. So in this situation, the P, or principal, is the amount we're starting with, which is $14,200. The rate is 6%, and the time is 60 days. Now, one thing we have to remember is that when we're dealing with interest formulas, is that time always needs to be expressed in years, not days, not months, not quarters. So how do we convert 60 days into years? So let's see how we would plug all these numbers into our formula. So we're going to have 14,200 times our rate is going to be 6%. So convert that to a decimal. So it'd be 0.06. And then we have to multiply that by our time, which is 60. Now again, it has to be in years. So all we have to do is do 60 over how many days are in a year? 365. If they gave us the number of months, let's say they gave us 9 months, then we would have put 9 over 12 because there's 12 months in a year. So if they give you days, put it over 365. If they give you months, put it over 12. So now we just have to do the math. So I'm going to put this in my calculator. So 60, I'm going to divide that fraction out first, just so I can get a decimal. Now, when I put it in my calculator, I get a really weird, strange decimal. So I'm just going to leave that number in my calculator. It's 0.164383516. So I'm just going to leave it there because I know I'm just multiplying all of these together. So I'm going to take that times 14,200 times 0.06. So when I multiply all of these together, I'm going to get interest is approximately, because again I'm rounding, and since we're talking a dollar amount, I'm going to round to the nearest cent. So my interest is $140.05. So the directions want us to find the amount of interest. So there's the first part. The second part, the total amount to be paid after 60 days. Well, I have to repay the original amount of $14,200 plus my interest of $140.05. So this is going to be the total amount that I have to pay back. So that means I am paying back $14,340.05. Now these problems want us to calculate compound interest, so we have to use a different formula. And that's A, which is the total amount, equals the principal times, actually it's plus, and then 1, actually, let's back that up, start over. It is P times, and then my plus goes on the inside. Confused myself for a second. Rate over how many times it's being compounded, and the power is how many times it's being compounded times t in years. So they give us the principal, which is our P, they give us the rate of interest, which is R, and they give us the t, and luckily they give it to us in years. So the only thing that we don't know right now is the N, and they actually give us the N. It's right here. It says compounded annually. So how many times per year? That would be equal to 1, since it's just happening once a year annually. So now let's look at one of these. We're going to look at the first one, number 9. So the amount in my account is going to equal my principal of $750 times 1 plus my rate of 4%, converted to a decimal would be 0.04, over n, which we had already identified as 1, and the power is going to be 1 times time in years, which is 2. So now we have to do order of operations. I'm going to simplify what's in my parentheses, because 0.04 divided by 1 is simply 1 plus 0.04, and then 1 times 2 is 2. So I'm going to have 750 times 1.04 squared when I add 1 plus 0.04. And now when I put this in my calculator, I have to square my 1.04 first, which gives me 1.0816. So when I multiply that times 750, I get $811.20. And that would be the amount in the account. So that's the original principal, $750, plus the interest. So that is the total in the account, $811.20. Now let's look at this situation. At the end of his sophomore year, Jason has a balance of $5,004.63 on a credit card with an annual percentage rate of 21.5%. He decides not to make additional purchases with his card until he has paid off the balance. Many credit cards require a minimum monthly payment of 2% of the balance. What is Jason's minimum payment on a balance of $5,004.63? Round the answer to the nearest dollar. So what we're going to do here is simply take our balance of $5,004.63 and multiply it by 2%. So remember, in your calculator, that's going to be 0.02. So 5,004.63 times 0.02, and I get approximately $100, because it does say round to the nearest dollar, and in my calculator I get 100.0926, so that's approximately $100. So that answers part A. That would be my minimum 2% payment. The next part B, says find the amount of interest and the amount applied to reduce the principal in the minimum payment found in part A. So the first thing we would have to do is calculate the minimum payment. So the minimum payment is going to be our starting balance, and after the first month, see, he's going to get charged 21.5%. So we're going to have to take that and multiply it by 21.5%, and then we have to multiply that, and I'm running out of room. So let me rewrite that a little bit smaller. So $5,004.63 times our 21.5% interest rate for 1 month, the time in years would be 1/12. So if he doesn't make initially that 2% payment with the original balance, then after the first month, he's going to get charged 21.5% interest on that original balance, and then we're going to find how much we're going to have in a payment. So $5,004.63 times, remember in your calculator, that's going to be 0.215 times 1/12. And I multiply all that together, and I round to the nearest cent, because we're talking money, I get $89.67. And that is how much of the $100, or $89.67 of the $100 goes towards the interest. Which means how much is actually reducing your principal? Well, 100 minus 89.67 leaves me with $10.33 for my principal. So out of my initial payment of $100, only $10.33 is going to pay down my balance, because $89.67 is going towards that interest. So a lot of money going towards the interest, because it is a really high interest rate. So this is the answer to part B, both parts. So now part C. So now part C is saying, well, what if Jason transferred his balance to a lower interest rate card? We would go through the same process. So instead of 5,463 times 0.215, we would take, let me switch colors, 5,463 times 13.9% times 1/12. So that's going to give me approximately $57.97 going towards my interest, which when I subtract that from 100, I get 4203. So this is a little bit better deal. This time only $57.97 is going towards interest, and $42.03 is actually going to pay down my principal, or my original amount. So compare the amounts for 13.9% from Part C with the amounts for 21.5% from Part B. Well, we are definitely saving money by switching to a lower interest rate. And the amount of savings we can find just by doing some subtraction. So if I just take my 89.67 and subtract the 57.97, that's going to leave me with $31.70 that is going towards my principal instead of interest.